This video is going to demonstrate how to increase or decrease by percentage. If you haven't already seen my video about changing percentages into decimals, then I suggest that you watch that video first. Let's look at an example. Imagine you were asked to increase a number, 42, by 20%. There are several different ways of doing this, and probably the method that you're most likely to know already would be this method. If we want to increase 42 by 20%, the sensible thing to do would be to find 20% of 42 so that we know what the increase is. Finding 20% of 42 means changing the percentage into a decimal by going zip zip, moving the decimal point back 2 places. Here we go, as per my previous video, which makes it 0.20. Of becomes times, and 42 goes along for the ride. In your calculator, 0.20 times 42 is 8.4. So that's the amount that 42 is going to be increased. So the second step is to add that 8.4 onto the original 42, and you get your final answer, 56.4. Now there's absolutely nothing wrong with that method, but as you get further into high school, you'll be asked to do the opposite of this, and if that's the case, then it's better for you to have an idea of how to do another method of doing this. Let's look at that other method. First of all, we're going to take this final line of our working of method 1, the 42 plus the 8.4 and the 56.4, and we're going to look at what they actually are, what those numbers actually are. Well, the 42 is 100% of 42. Seems like a strange statement, stating the bleeding obvious if you like. The 8.4 is 20% of 42. We calculated that on the previous page. So when we add those two together, not only are we adding 42 and 8.4, but we're adding 100% of 42 to 20% of 42. So altogether, we've got 120% of 42. 56.4 is 120% of 42. The 100% we started with plus the 20% we increased it by. So this number here is 120% of 42. This brings us to method 2. Instead of finding 20% of 42 and adding it on, let's add the percents together to start with. 100% plus 20% is 120%. That's something that you can do in your head. So let's just with one step now find 120% of 42, because after all, that's what 56.4 is. It's 120% of 42. 120% as a decimal, zip zip, is 1.2. The of becomes a times, and the 42 goes along for the ride. Into your calculator, one step, 56.4. Now the benefit of this method is that this step here, the adding the 100% and the 20%, that can be done in your head. Anyone can do that. You don't need to do that on your calculator. So your calculation goes from 2 steps to just 1 step. Let's look at how it works with decreasing by a percentage. Imagine we've been asked to decrease 138 by 14%. So what we're going to do, and this part will probably be done in your head, is we're going to say, well, if we're decreasing 100% by 14%, that's 100 minus 14%. 100% minus 14% is 86%. Now, all we need to do is find 86% of the 138. 86% as a decimal, zip zip, is 0.86. Of becomes a times, 138 goes along for the ride. Into our calculator, we get our answer in one step, 118.68. Why don't you pause the video now, write these questions down on your book, and have a go, grab your calculator, and have a go at doing these 3 questions using method 2. How did you go? Let's look at the solutions. Now, I've written out the part that I'm doing in my head, and I think it's probably a good idea until you get better at them. So increasing 78 by 35%. As soon as I see increasing by percentage, I'm thinking, well, we're taking the whole 100%. We're increasing, so we're adding 35%. So we're going to be finding 135% of 78. 135%, zip zip, becomes 1.35 times 78 is 105.3. Let's have a little look to make sure that it makes sense. 78 increased by about a third. A third of 78 is about, oh, well, it's 20 something, isn't it? 26, I think. 26 more than 78 is going to be just over the 100 mark. So I'm fairly happy I've not made a mistake there. Let's look at the decrease 250 by 12%. Decreasing a whole by 12% means 100% minus 12%. That part you probably can do in your head is equal to 88%. 88% of 250, 88 zip zip, 0.88 times 250 is 220. Let's just check to see whether or not that makes sense. 12% is a little bit more than 10%. 10% of 250 is about 25. If we decrease 250 by 25, we're going to get 225. 220 is pretty close to that, so fairly happy with that. Finally, let's look at this last question, question 3. Over the past 5 years, the population of koalas in the Redlands has decreased by 20%. If the population was 1,255 5 years ago, what is it now? So the population has decreased over the last 5 years. It's decreased by 22%. If the population was, this is the original population 5 years ago, what is it now? Let's look at that question mark. So we're decreasing by 22%. So in our heads, we're going to do 100% minus 22% is 78%. So population now is going to be 78%, zip zip, 0.78 of 1,255, which is 978.9. Unlikely to have 0.9 of a koala, so let's round up. The population of koalas now is approximately 979 koalas. Word answer for a word question. So, how did you go? Good. Watch some more of my videos. Thanks.